I'll make this quick. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Eugenia Rho. Eugenia did her PhD at UC Irvine, and then I did a postdoc in Stanford's NLP lab, working with Dan Jarowski, among others, and is now assistant professor at Virginia Tech, where she runs the SAIL, Society, AI, and Language Lab, which is kind of at the intersection of NLP and human-computer interaction, and looking at things like how communication breaks down in different contexts when we have kind of misalignment between people with different value systems or machines that have biases trained into them, that sort of thing, and how we can remedy the situation and so on and so forth. And so I'll let her talk about some of the very compelling examples of that in her talk. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Well, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the warm introduction. I'm grateful to have you all here today for my talk. I currently lead the Society plus AI and Language Lab at Virginia Tech Computer Science, where I work with my wonderful team of MS and PhD students. And my research lies at the intersection of human-computer interaction and natural language processing. And I combine these two areas to understand how AI-mediated systems impact interactions across people and machines. And I'm particularly interested in understanding how we can improve the way we talk about things and to each other. And this is because effective communication lies at the heart of social harmony and individual well-being. However, key areas of our society are facing profound challenges in how we talk about things and to each other. And in this talk, I'm going to show how some of these challenges manifest and impact our society, from the language of broadcast media on the impact that it has on social media discourse, to the impact of social media conversations on nationwide trends and health outcomes, and the effect of an officer's first words to a driver in a car stop. First, I'm going to be talking about a study that illustrates how broadcast media language influences the way we talk about current events on social media. Mass media, as you may all know, plays a vital role in democratic processes by influencing how people like you and I engage in politics and discuss current events. And this idea is theorized as what's known as agenda setting theory. And according to this theory, language used by the media to frame and present current events impacts how we perceive what issues to be important. And in recent years, language on televised news has become more partisan. And perhaps that's because that's what sells. For example, hyperpartisan politicians get 4 times more coverage on cable news than those who are less partisan. Well, you might be thinking, so what? Isn't legacy media like televised news less relevant today? Surprisingly, not so. Americans consume news from television almost 5 times more than they do so online. And contrary to popular belief that watching news on TV is more passive compared to reading news online, viewers remember information from TV news more effectively than from what they read online. Simply, the influence of broadcast media on the history of American politics and ensuing public discourse has been and continues to be profound. However, what remains less understood is the ways in which how language from broadcast media shapes conversations about current events on newer platforms like social media. So to find out, we analyzed a decade's worth of closed captions from 24/7 news programs aired on CNN and Fox News, along with topically corresponding social media conversations on Twitter from Twitter users who follow and engage with the two stations on Twitter. And given my interest in political communication, I studied political science as an undergrad. And given the current state of partisan divide in this country, we asked the following research questions. First, how did semantic polarization in broadcast media language evolve over the last decade? And to what extent does this polarization influence how people talk about current events on social media? And to answer these questions, we analyzed all the closed captions from 24/7 news programs from the two stations from 2010 to 2020. And this amounted to about 24 million speaker turns, or about 300 billion words. And from here, we further narrowed our sample to speaker turns with politically important but controversial keywords at the time of the study, such as racism, Black Lives Matter, police, immigration, climate change, healthcare, and so on. To answer the first research question, we used word embeddings to calculate the semantic distance using cosine values in how CNN and Fox News discuss these topic keywords over the past decade. To show this very quickly mathematically, given the set of word embeddings for a keyword in a given year from CNN and the set of word embeddings for the same keyword in the same year for Fox News, we define semantic polarity as follows, where n sub 1 is a number of word embeddings from CNN and n sub 2 is the number of word embeddings from Fox News. To illustrate this more visually, let's take the keyword racist in year 2010. First, we extract the embeddings associated with the word racist in a speaker turn from Fox News in the year 2010. And then we do the same for CNN. And then we repeat this process for every occurrence of the word racist for that year for both stations. Then we calculate the cosine distance between the tensors associated with the word embedding racist from CNN and that of Fox News. And then calculate the average of all the cosine distance values to obtain the semantic polarization score between how Fox News and CNN used the word racist in 2010. And we repeat this step for every year from 2010 to 2020. And here are the results. Starting in 2015, there is an upward trend, as you can see here. And from 2016 onward, semantic polarization between the two stations continues to rise on average about 112% across all the keywords, reaching their highest peaks in 2020. So from here, we wanted to understand what's the role of language in driving this 2020 peak, this most recent peak between the two stations. In other words, what words did CNN and Fox News use in their discussion of the same identical keywords in this year? To find out, we first trained a BERT-based classifier to predict whether a speaker turn was from CNN or from Fox News in 2020. Then we used integrated gradients, which is a deep learning interpretation technique, to identify which words, except for the topical keyword, in each speaker turn contributed most to the classification decision in the previous step. And this is what we found. Here, I'm showing you the top 10 words that are most predictive of whether a sentence containing a keyword such as racism, BLM, climate change, and so on was CNN or from Fox News. And if you look closely, perhaps better in the paper, none of the top tokens between the two stations overlap, indicating the drastically distinct context in which the two stations are discussing identical topics. Let's take a look at one example more closely. For example, words like illegal, enforcement, and order contextualize immigration discussions on Fox News, whereas parents, family, children, daughter, and communities, these humanizing words associated with relations and family, best predict how CNN discuss immigration. And as you can see, both stations might be discussing the same topic, but the contextual language surrounding their discussion is strikingly different. Given these results, we then asked, to what extent does such semantic polarization in broadcast media language influence patterns in how social media users are polarized in their discussions? To answer this, we used what's called Granger causality. Granger causality is a statistical test to determine whether a time series X is meaningful in predicting another time series Y. And we use this method to test whether semantic polarity patterns between CNN and Fox News significantly predict semantic polarity patterns between Twitter users who follow and mention at Fox News or at CNN in their tweets. Tweets that include the same identical keywords: racist, racism, police, BLM, and so on. And to conduct this test, we collected all tweets from 2010 to 2020 that were written by users who follow at CNN and at Fox News, mention or are replying to at CNN or at Fox News, and contain one of the 9 keywords from RQ1. And while this is no guarantee that these users were actual viewers of the televised news stations, this criteria nevertheless allows us to capture a sample that is likely to be exposed to how the 2 stations frame and discuss the 9 keywords. So using this data, we tested the following hypotheses. H1, semantic polarization patterns on TV significantly predicts polarization patterns on Twitter over the last 11 years, and its reversal, H2. And indeed, we found that semantic polarization patterns on broadcast media significantly predicts how semantic polarization patterns fluctuates on Twitter over the last decade. And I'll show you how. For H1, semantic polarization patterns in broadcast media's discussion on racism and immigration significantly predicts polarization patterns in how people discuss these topics on Twitter, with a time lag of 2 and 3 months. In other words, it takes about 2 months for the semantic polarization patterns on TV to manifest across how Twitter users semantically diverge in their discussions on racism, and about 3 months for discussions on immigration. And for H2, semantic polarization patterns on climate change discussions on Twitter significantly predicts how such discussions diverge between the 2 stations on TV. And a possible reason for this may be due to the fact that climate change discussions on social media, such as Twitter, have become increasingly polarized, increasingly political, and less scientific over the past decade. Therefore, raising online prominence of the topic through, controversial political sound bites, which in turn draws attention from traditional media, such as TV news outlets, as a source for reporting. For Black Lives Matter, we have what's called bidirectional causality, meaning that semantic polarization patterns significantly shapes fluctuations in how Twitter replies to ad CNN and ad Fox News diverge, and vice versa. And this may be due to the fact that while TV news reporting can influence social media conversations, Black Lives Matter, as you all know, is predominantly was an online social movement, largely driven by discursive networks. Therefore, news stations may be attuned to how people discuss BLM on social media as well. So given this Granger causal relationship where semantic polarizations patterns on TV can significantly predict patterns on social media, we wondered, could this mean that words from televised news trickle over to social media conversations? And the answer is yes. Yes.
Yeah, just a quick question about all of this work. You're talking about polarization or specific words predicting, at one time, predicting the same polarization or words at a later time in the other medium, right?
So it's separated by significant Granger causal lag lengths, meaning there's
I was going to ask.
Right. So for example, for different topics, for different keywords, the time it takes for semantic polarization patterns on TV to appear on social media is different depending what the topic is.
Can you give us like a ballpark?
Oh, for climate change and global warming, those keywords, I think it was a little bit longer, but for BLM it's shorter. And the direction, and it also depends on the direction. For BLM, it's bidirectional, meaning that language on TV influences language on Twitter and vice versa. And the time it takes for the words to reappear on one media and the other, it varies as well. as well as the keywords, which I will show later.
Are we talking about hours, days, weeks, months?
Months.
Okay.
Right. And because this was an analysis conducted over 10 years worth of data, we focused on the interval of time that made more that gave us the most distinguishable causal effect. Yeah. So yes, words that characterize broadcast media polarization reappear across Twitter discussions separated by significant lag months. For example, words that are most characteristic of how CNN discusses racism on Twitter reappear in Twitter discussions responding to @CNN, such as believe, today, president, Trump, campaign, history, issues. And you can see the same phenomenon for Fox News. Words most predictive of how Fox News talks about racism on TV, such as right, party, Black, and media, also reappear in the top 10 words most predictive of how people talk about racism in response to Fox News on Twitter. And as you can see, for racism, it's the lag of 2 months. So in summary, TV's news language does not only shape how people perceive current events, but it can also predict how they talk about them on social media. And in linguistics, collocation is the property of language where 2 or more words appear in each other's company with greater than random chance, such as illegal and immigrants in Fox News and climate change and science in CNN, as shown in this study. And repeated encounters with collocated words can drive what's called lexical priming, in which priming words like Black Lives Matter provokes a target word protest for CNN and violence for Fox News more strongly and quickly than words that are seldom seen together. So in this vein, audiences who are inundated with distinct linguistic realities portrayed on TV about current events may be lexically primed by these repeated collocations in their subsequent discussions on social media. And this may help theorize why words that characterize TV polarization reappear across Twitter discussions, suggesting that language characterizing opposing media narratives around identical events on TV, as shown in this image, can be linguistically mimicked in social media discourse, influencing how people engage in issues that affect society. In the next study, which is currently under submission, I'm going to demonstrate how causal language patterns on social media can be correlated with nationwide health outcomes. According to fuzzy trace theory, which is a theoretical concept in social psychology, gists, or texts that clearly establish cause-effect relationships, help people understand and remember information better than text without any causal coherence. And researchers have empirically shown that the presence of gist in text influences how people make decisions, perceive risk, especially in medical contexts, such as whether to take a vaccine, cancer treatments, or even the prescription of antibiotics by doctors. So grounded in this theoretical framework, we ask the following research question. How are causal language patterns, or gists, across social media communities that denounce pandemic health practices associated with patterns in national health outcomes? And to find out, we collected data from 20 well-known subreddits that were banned for denouncing pandemic health practices over the course of the pandemic. And we also collected temporally corresponding health outcome data in the US, daily number of COVID vaccines that are administered, daily general and ICU hospitalization counts due to COVID, and total daily and new COVID-19 cases. In using this data, we first extracted gists, or causal language patterns, in these Reddit conversations at scale. And for this, we used GPT-4 to create a multi-step prompting framework called RBIC, or role-based incremental coaching. And RBIC really draws inspiration from prior NLP research that leveraged multi-step reasoning capabilities, such as chain of thought. The first part of the framework focuses on enhancing the model's understanding of its role as a task-performing agent. And in our case, the task is to extract gists from Reddit conversations. So first, we prompt the model. Your role is to understand cause-effect relationships in social media posts Can you define what cause-effect relationship is? To which the model responds, yes, a cause-effect relationship is, et cetera, et cetera. Next, we ask, based on your role, can you explain the term gist in relation to the sentences that have causal coherence? To which the model responds, of course, the term gist refers to, et cetera, et cetera. And why do we do this? We do this because asking LLMs to generate potentially useful information about a given task improves the final response. For example, when prompted with the following, which country is larger, Congo or South Africa? GPT-3 answers incorrectly. South Africa is not the right answer here. However, when the model is first prompted to generate some knowledge about the sizes of Congo and South Africa, the model uses that answer to generate the correct response to the same question, which is Congo. So based on this intuition, the corresponding responses to prompt 1 and prompt 2, P1, P2, which are the outputs O1 and O2 shown here, are then integrated into a task-specific prompt in the following steps. And in this stage, which we call incremental coaching, we break down the final task of generating the gist into smaller subtasks. In prompt 3, given the text, I took a vaccine yesterday, I'm really sick now. We ask the model if there is a cause effect implied in this text, to which the model answers yes or no. And if the model answered yes, RBIC prompts the model to extract the corresponding cause and effect text spans. And for our case, we asked it to spit it out in JSON format. And using this cause and effect pair, RBIC prompts the model to generate a coherent gist, which in this case is taking the vaccine yesterday caused the person to become sick. So using this framework, we are doing 3 things simultaneously: classification, extraction, and generation, which would normally require 3 separate models for each task. To evaluate RBIC, we used human evaluation based on the following criteria: accuracy for classification, is there a cause-effect relationship in the post, yes or no? Relevance for extraction, and conciseness for generation. And RBIC's performance across the 3 criteria were generally high based on iterator agreement scores using FLICE Kappa. And here are some sample results from applying RBIC on Reddit posts during discussing pandemic health practices. One post reads, imagine pointing and laughing at a single father of 3 who's now jobless and has to take care of 3 kids with no income, all because he didn't want to wear a face diaper or take the experimental gene modification. From this, RBIC extracted the cause. He didn't want to wear a face diaper or take the experimental gene modification. And the effect, he's now jobless and has to take care of 3 kids with no income. And then generated the following gist. It's a bit wordy, and it can be wordy, and it's a bit long sometimes. The man's refusal to wear a face mask or take the experimental gene job and being unable to provide for his 3 children, resulting in financial hardship and increased responsibility for him. And RBIC also works even in longer and more nuanced posts. This Reddit post reads, I stumbled upon some news. Governor Wolf has a false positive, won't admit it because it would be admitting the tests are unreliable. And do you think it's possible that politicians might hide their own false positive results to maintain confidence in the testing system? And the cause here is false positive, won't admit it. The effect extracted is it would be admitting the tests are unreliable. And together, using these cause-effect text spans, RBIC generates Governor Wolf won't admit a false positive because it would undermine COVID-19 test reliability, potentially affecting public health and safety measures. So after extracting all the gist in this manner from our data, we wanted to know what kind of gist characterize people's arguments against pandemic health practices. And for this, we use SentenceBERT to generate sentence embeddings from the gists and k-means to cluster the embeddings. And this gave us a total of 6 topical gist clusters that characterize how people argue against pandemic health practices on these banned subreddits. Vaccines, mask wearing, the impact of lockdown, the pandemic's macro impact on society, conspiracy theories, and of course, posts without gists. And here are some representative examples of RBIC extracted gists from each topic cluster. For vaccines, the implementation of a vaccine mandate has resulted in people losing their jobs. Wearing masks prevents people from seeing each other's faces, which leads to difficulties in understanding and building trust with others. People are literally starting to go hungry because of lockdown restrictions. COVID-19 caused people to struggle with their livelihood, leading to financial difficulties and economic instability. If COVID was intentionally released, it would lead to a major benefit for China and billionaires. Yes.
Just to clarify this, these are conclusions or these are rephrasings based on people's own claims,
Yes.
hollow claims on Reddit forums.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you say people, for example, people losing their jobs, it is basically a bunch of people that have made this claim. And
No, one post,
to this vaccine.
one post. So one sentence, one gist. Yeah, yeah. And these are so this is so representative of some of the posts, the gists that were identified within each topical clusters.
Thank you.
And what's really interesting is that when we map the daily volume of gist, the gist clusters according to its topic, we see that the peak volume of gist for each cluster align closely with key events related to the respective topics embodied by those clusters. For example, by May 2020, this is when a little over the world's population was under lockdown, which coincided with when the peak of cluster 3 gist, which relates to the impact of lockdown, reached its highest. Cluster 5 gists, which are related to conspiracy theories, reached their peak volume in August, the same month when former President Trump refers to COVID as a China virus in his White House briefing and retweets conspiracy theory. Cluster 1 gist, which relates to vaccines, peaks in November 2020, coinciding with the start of the vaccine rollout in the US. And in December, this is when nearly 30 million American adults are struggling with food and income insecurity, and Congress passes the 90 billion stimulus bill for US households. And this is the month when cluster 4 gists across Reddit, which relate to the macro impact of COVID, reaches its peak volume. And finally, the daily volume of cluster 2 gists related to masks peaks in June, the same month in which federal mask mandate is lifted. So, yes.
Are these number of unique gists?
Sorry, could you?
Are these number of unique gists or just?
Are these number?
Unique gists? Are these number of unique gists?
Oh, yes, unique daily volume of unique gists. Yes, because we collected all the metadata, the timestamps. Yes. So given these results, given those results, we wanted to address the question of whether and how social media language in the form of causal language patterns gists could significantly predict patterns in nationwide health outcomes. So similar to the first study, we used Ranger causality to test whether and how the daily volume of unique gists could significantly predict the daily health outcome trends in the US. And this is what we found. Causal talk around vaccine wearing practices, or the volume of, or the daily, or the volume of gists related to masks, significantly predicts nationwide fluctuations in the total and new daily COVID-19 cases. Rising hospitalization patterns in the US significantly predicts the volume of causal talk on lockdown impact, which is cluster 3 gist. And similarly, rising trends in daily COVID-19 cases predicts causal talk on the pandemic's macro impact on society. And finally, causal talk around vaccines, cluster 1 gist, and national COVID vaccination trends are bidirectional. And what this shows is that causal language patterns on social media that refute pandemic health practices are significantly interrelated with nationwide trends in important health decisions and outcomes. And this is important because social media was at the center of proliferating these conversations, refuting pandemic health practices and mandates based on misinformation, identity politics, and so on. And this in return obscured people's knowledge of safe health practices, making well-informed decisions extremely difficult. And what our work shows is that language in the form of gists can play a key role in understanding how these conversations proliferate and ultimately how it impacts the way people perceive risks and health decisions, and by extension, nationwide trends in important health outcomes. In the last study, I will demonstrate another example of how language plays a key role in impacting individuals and society, specifically the impact of an officer's first words to a driver in a car stop. This was a project based on a 3-year collaboration with my colleagues at Stanford and at University of Michigan. So by now, we all know that the killing of George Floyd led to the largest racial justice movement of the 21st century. And ever since, there has been many urgent calls for police to de-escalate encounters. However, while we have all too often seen the end result of escalated encounters between the police and Black Americans, we are much less familiar with how escalation begins. And we know that racial disparities exist across many contexts, and car stops are no different. In fact, car stops are actually the most common ways in which people like you and I will generally encounter law enforcement officers. However, compared to any other racial demographic, Black Americans are disproportionately pulled over and are most likely to be handcuffed, searched, and arrested compared to other demographics. So what is going on in these stops of Black drivers? What happens in the very initial moments of interaction between an officer and a Black driver? Do these initial moments shape what is going to unfold? And how does language play a role in these first moments? To find out, we focus our analysis on the first 45 words spoken by the officer or approximately the first 30 seconds of the stop. And because concerns about escalation in police-drive interactions arise even when no force is used, we operationalize escalated stops as those that do not involve use of force, but result in the handcuffing, searching, or arresting of the driver. And for this research, we conducted 2 studies. The first study aims to understand officer language that characterizes escalated versus non-escalated stops. In study 2, we then examined the impact of officer language in escalated versus non-escalated stops on Black male drivers in the United States. Our data set comes from professionally transcribed police body camera footage of 577 stops of Black drivers conducted over the course of 1 month in a racially diverse medium-sized city. And we limited our sample to Black drivers because 98% of the drivers who experienced one of the 3 outcomes were Black. And out of this sample, 81 stops were escalated with 76 searches, 56 handcuffings, and 24 arrests. And to give you a bit of context, 81% of the searches conducted on the Black drivers did not result in any incriminating evidence, such as the discovery of drugs or weapons. And with this data set, we then hand labeled for institutional dialogue acts in the officer's first 45 words. Institutional dialogue acts are concrete speech acts tied to the speaker's institutional role. For example, during a traffic stop, an officer typically greets the driver, states the reason for the stops, asks for ID, insurance, and so on. And while officers are trained to conduct traffic stops in particular ways, they're also given pretty broad discretion to interact in ways that they see fit. So we wondered whether the presence or absence of particular dialogue acts may be connected to the eventual outcomes of a stop. In other words, which dialogue acts are associated with the start of escalated stops? To find out, we ran a logistic regression to test whether a stop outcome could be predicted by the presence of these dialogue acts. We controlled for the driver and the officer's gender, race, the crime rate in the area that the stop took place. And we found that in their first 45 words, officers in escalated stops are significantly less likely to provide reasons for the stop and more likely to give orders compared to officers in non-escalated stops. In other words, in less than the first 30 seconds, escalated stops are nearly 3 times more likely to begin with an order and 2.5 times less likely to begin with the officer providing a reason for the stop. So could these linguistic differences be a result of officers reacting to non-compliant drivers? To test this, we actually manually examined all the driver speech and coded it among 3 annotators and found that no, the vast majority of driver speech comprised of answering the questions, explaining their behavior to the officer, or just any kind of verbal signals of compliance to the officer. And there was 0 instance of non-compliance from the driver. So then, could this be a result of few officers driving the pattern? In other words, is this a problem of a few bad apples in the barrel? And the answer is no. The modal officer in our sample conducted a single stop of a Black driver in that given month of our data. And likewise, the 59 officers who had at least 1 escalated stop, 42 had exactly 1 escalated encounter. Then, are the results due to differences in the officer's reason for initiating the stop? And the answer is no here too. Significant differences among reason and order dialogue acts persist even when we control for the officer's legal justification for the stop. And in 94% of these escalated stops, officers reported the reason as a traffic violation, like a broken taillight or rolling through a stop sign, rather than something more potentially serious. So given this distinct signature in officer language in escalated versus non-escalated stops, we then asked, can language models predict whether a stop will end in escalation or not solely based on the officer's first 45 words? And the answer is yes, with about 70% accuracy, providing further evidence of distinguishable linguistic differences in escalated versus non-escalated stops. The fact that the initial word
base rate was 50, that's what it means at the top. This is a balanced data set.
Yes, 50-50, yes, of course, yeah. And the fact that the initial words an officer speaks in a matter of less than 30 seconds of signal and escalated outcomes suggests that escalation need not build over time. Rather, stops that end in escalation often begin in escalation. And we see that there is a key linguistic signature of escalation, more orders and lack of reason. What then is the impact of the signature on Black male drivers? To find out, in our second study, we had 188 Black male adults listen to the first 45 officer words from 5 escalated and 5 non-escalated stops that were randomly drawn from our sample. And here we masked the driver's speech in the clip so that the participants could only hear the first 45 words spoken by the officer. And we asked them to place themselves in the shoes of the driver as they listened to each clip and asked about their feelings and predictions about each stop. And this is what we found. Black drivers in escalated stops would feel more negative emotions if they were the driver, rated the officer demeanor more negatively, were more confident that the stops would result in handcuffing, search, and arrest, and were more worried that the officer could use force on them. So clearly, Black men are distinguishing between stops that escalate and those that do not. And we wondered, are these participants picking up on the same linguistic signature of escalation that we saw in the first study, namely the presence of orders and the lack of reasons? Yes, they are. Over 84% predicted escalation when officers began with orders without reason, while only 37% predicted escalation when reasons were given without orders. Furthermore, anxiety over potential use of force was reported in over 80% of the stops initiated with orders, but no reason, compared to less than half, 47%, reported feeling anxious when reasons were given without orders. So our research shows that escalated stops have a linguistic signature in the officer's first words. Officers give orders rather than reasons, and this linguistic signature can be detected by coders, NLP models, and Black drivers themselves. And for Black male adults, these first 45 words from the officer function as a predictor of how they perceive the officer, what might happen next, and whether force will be used on them. But this is not to say that the outcome of the stop is preordained by an officer's choice of words. While escalated and non-escalated encounters can be distinguished above chance from thin slices of officers' language, there is also overlap between these two stops. And this ambiguous boundary between the non-escalated and escalated encounters can be a reason why police stops can be so anxiety-inducing among citizens of color. And especially if the same linguistic signature of escalation is also present when force is used. So here, let's take a look at the linguistic signature of one prominent use of force. Millions of people know how officers have treated George Floyd after he was forcibly removed from his vehicle. Far few know how he was treated beforehand. What I'm going to do now is play the audio of the first 27 seconds of the stop that captures the interaction between the first responding officer, former Officer Lane, and George Floyd, while showing you the transcript of their interaction. And this goes by really quickly. And I'll try moving my mouse as I play the audio. Okay, so that was really quick, and this transcript is in the paper, and it was also professionally transcribed. So what we see here is that in less than the first 30 seconds, this is actually 27 seconds, Floyd communicates with the officer through a total of 11 speech turns, which contain 2 apologies, I'm sorry, Mr. Officer, 2 requests for reasons for the stop, what we do, 3 proclaiming innocence, I do nothing, 2 explanations signaling fear, 1 exclamation, and 3 pleas. And clearly, as you can see here, there's a range of responses from Floyd, but from the officer, there is no range. Every word the officer utters to Floyd, every response to him is in order. And what this shows is that officer language signals a trajectory that may be detectable by Black drivers. Only based on the first 45 words spoken by an officer in less than a half a minute, it's possible that a Black male driver could think, I could be handcuffed, I could be searched, I could be arrested. And even though the use of force is rare, our data suggests that worry about force among Black male adults could be much higher. And in return, this worry may drive negative police encounters. And with this understanding, we see that language is quite essential in addressing the crisis of police legitimacy and de-escalation training in police-citizen encounters. There's clearly a need for policy changes that promote trust and transparency rather than fear and anxiety in how officers communicate with community members. So in this talk today, I've highlighted the various challenges in the way we talk about things and the way we talk to each other and how these challenges affect us. And what we can really see from these findings is that power is that words have power. The power of words we speak and write, in essence, shows that words are not mere passive reflections of our reality, but that they are its architects. Thank you. That's the end of the talk. Happy